Nice background.
Thank you. Personal space.
Yeah, I think Aditya is there. Yeah, Aditya, I think we'll take another 5 minutes.
Sure.
Aditya, it looked like you're set up for an interview, man. What's up?
Oh man, this is a homage to your background. I don't know if you're seeing a mirror image version or not. But
No, I'm seeing it. It's good. I like it.
Bharat, have you published the YouTube link already?
Seems to be streaming on YouTube
Yes.
already.
Uh-huh.
Oh, the link.
Yep.
Bharat gets to be anonymized, is it? He's just referred to as Blue Madman.
Akash, you're missing IPL. Like,
Yeah.
missing IPL this year.
I am actually. I think a whole bunch of us are. It's a great time. I just I'm not the biggest cricket fan, ironically, but since I've joined Hotstar, it's been something you live and breathe. It's quite the carnival.
I know.
You know, it's sort of a technical Super Bowl for us as well. So we really look forward to it. We prepare a lot. We probably go into prep as about the same time as players go into boot camp as well. So it's a lot of parallels there.
Got it. I'm sure you would have created some new records this time.
Sure, maybe IPL. It just never ceases to surprise me. It's always you think that our record actually is now held by a one-day game. Ironically, that it wasn't a one-day game, uh, but you think smaller formats will be that popular, but uh, if it's compelling and India playing, of course, that has infinite amounts of pull. Like it's just even when we hit 25.3, it was unbelievable. We just couldn't believe it had, and people kept on coming. I think one of our I'm a big Dhoni fan, so when Dhoni was still playing, people were just piling on.
I
Like
know. There was a spike.
it would have been 30 plus, if he had continued to the end.
Yes.
We joke in Hotstar, right? Like, so when Dhoni comes, we joke that, so Dhoni literally brings on like 3 million people. He comes to bat 3 million people. It's amazing.
Yeah. I could see that that viewership drop as soon as during that semifinals when Dhoni got out.
It's very hard.
Okay.
It was very
so hard.
heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Very hard.
Yes.
So we have because we are also the broadcaster, right? We have this thing called the world feed. It's literally like a good minute ahead of everybody else in the world. So it's the unprocessed feed that we get, right? And oh my god, yeah, it was very heartbreaking.
I know.
Yeah.
So Aditya, I think we have around close to 50 people. I think we're good to start. I think we'll have some more people joining in next five minutes.
And also a bunch of people coming in on the YouTube link. So yeah, let's get started.
Yes.
Before we jump on to an introduction with Akash, Bharat, you want to just quickly take us through what this entire In Good Company series is about?
Yes. So hello everyone. A warm good evening for everyone to join today on Friday evening. I hope everyone is safe and doing well. My name is Bharat and I lead community at Bloom. And since last 2 weeks, we have been doing this learning series for CXOs, CXO focused conversations. And this is our third one, which we are doing with our Akash, moderated by Aditya at InstaMojo. So basically, the idea is to bring some key learnings from CXO's respective journeys, and also possibly pick up some learnings how these people are navigating the current situation, which would be highly valuable to the community. So that's the intent, and we'll continue to do these, and we'll keep getting updates from us. So without taking much time, I'll pass it on to Aditya and Akash, and let them take it forward.
Cool. Thanks, Bharat.
So a bit of housekeeping for those of you who are joining in via the Zoom link. There is a Q&A section below, which you can use to post any questions that you have along the way. We'll pick up questions that we see are highly voted. Other people can vote on these questions if you think that there's something great. Please vote on one of those, and we'll pick it up. Over to actually starting the session, Akash Saxena. He's the SVP of engineering at Hotstar. This is not his first recession, right? This is, I think, his third recession. He's been through a bunch of wartime situations. So we figured who better than someone like Akash to kind of guide us in these uncertain times. Akash, you want to take us through a bit of your history, like your journey so far?
Sure. I suppose we're calling this a bit of a recession now, huh? Yeah, plenty of white hair. So that's just a passage of time. I started. I'm a Pune boy. Born and raised in Pune. Graduated in '97 from College of Engineering Pune, and that's when I got my first job. I started my career at Persistent Systems in Pune. Worked for a year, and then jumped over to the US to do my masters, like all good engineers did back in the day. Now all of you guys are entrepreneurs, which is amazing. A lot of opportunity. I majored in computer science. Was also working while I was in the US through my masters. I also parallelly worked at a startup there during my masters. Then moved to the Bay Area. Again, I've always worked with startups. Worked for a startup there. That's graduated in 2000. That was when things were starting to get really bad. Um, and literally, I have, like you talk about wartime stories. I think I really lost my innocence in those 3 years. Saw 4 layoffs. Right, the last layoff with me kind of really, like, the whole company shutting down. I can touch upon some of the stories later. Post that, I think I was kind of very jaded with startups, but I still continued to be a sucker for startups. Kept looking for opportunities. Found a home at OpenTable. Worked there for 12 years, which is just mind-numbing if I think about it. But never did more than the same thing more than 2 years. Just kept jumping. It was an amazing place to work at. Just was in the Bay Area till about 2007. 2007, I moved back to India, and was still with OpenTable. Then jumped ship to Tiny Owl, led tech there. That was a great ride. Lots of really good memories. I think it was that really began. I think it was a lot of re-education for me as the leader, and leading the tech team and so on. A lot of what I do today, I think I owe to Tiny Owl. Tiny Owl was just about 7 months before we imploded. Then jump ship, figured I'd do some ecom, led tech at Cloudzilla. Again, super educational, kind of, refined on a lot of things that we were sort of just started the journey at Tiny Owl. And then since then, I've been at Hotstar now almost 3 years up. It's been a brilliant journey so far. So it's very, very, very briefly and quickly about my background.
And you want to also maybe quickly take us through the journey that you've had with Hotstar, because a lot of things have evolved. Hotstar has blown up in so many ways. And I mean that in a good way, with all the live cricket streaming, the Disney Plus acquisition, and so on.
Yes. Hotstar's been brilliant. I think I tell this story, people who work for me and Hotstar would probably know. But when Hotstar initially contacted me, I actually refused because I said, yeah, I don't want to work at a SaaS Bahu place, right? Like, I'm a startup guy. This doesn't seem like the place that I would like to work at. In fact, Hotstar is probably one of the largest places I've worked at. Just from a company perspective, right? Like Disney, or even back then it was 21st Century Fox and Star TV. So I remember going in, and I liked all the people I met. That time I think the team was about 25, 30 people. Um, and it was great. I think the opportunity was there, and they were sitting on a lot of really good properties, and we were like, yeah, I mean, we could probably do something with it. The key point was that there was a lot of entrepreneurial spirit, and there was a huge risk appetite, right? It was very startup-y even inside a really big organization. Since then, we've sort of grown the team. I think it's very large still, about 250 people, 4 locations, right? And when I started, we basically didn't have our own product, right? It was actually outsourced, right? It's an interesting story how Hotstar began, even, right? I think the company decided that they wanted to, they obviously they had all these properties, and digital was picking up. So they started by outsourcing a bunch of stuff, and starting to see if it had traction, incredible traction, right? Sports, India Pakistan was one of the first things they did, the Star Sports back then. And they were surprised by the traction it got. That basically led them to form what today is Hotstar. This effectively was starsports.com. A little bit of history there. And we quickly realized that wow, we're sitting on something valuable, and if we are going to we want to make something of it, we need to be a tech company. And that's kind of, I also use this as an example of the audaciousness that the group has, right? Like, yeah, let's be a tech company. Just like deciding one day and going for it. That was the kind of the way the leadership works there, which has been very empowering. Actually, it's really gotten us to where how far we've gotten, I think, in the last 2-3 years. But starting there with nothing, and then having the backing of the leadership to launch in 2018. That was really the first year we had IPL live. Prior to that, we had a delayed 5-minute stream from Sony. We had won the global IPL bid in that year, and 2018 was the first year we had it. So for the leadership to trust us was fabulous. I think I I can count on my fingers, the number of times leadership has backed tech in such a big way. Right, at least in my career, I can. Right, it was always, like, I don't know if they do it and so on. Right, so but these, like, we had some currency, and that was a big responsibility that I personally had for my team, which was completely unproven at that point to have delivered it. Obviously, your team did fabulously. I think we broke a record in our first outing. At that time the record was about 5 million and change, and like through the tournament we hit about 10 million. Like, we used to joke about uh, hitting 10 million. We actually crossed in when really nobody knew what would happen when we breached that barrier, because nobody expected to breach that barrier then. So that was a huge, really fond memories of breaking that first 10 million barrier. And then since then, it's just been, you know, it's been a lot of hard work. Each IPL is different, right? Every year we've done something different to kind of make it work. And the overarching principle is that there's no telling the tsunami that you get, right? And we prepare for the worst, as it were, right? And then some. So then the platform can never go down. So that's just been one of those principles we follow. Yeah, and it's been a great ride. 25.3 last year. Unfortunately, we would have been in the middle of IPL now, but due to COVID, there are much more important things to solve with these days. Yeah.
And how has the acquisition by Disney changed things for you guys?
Oh, that's it's been a great and positive acquisition for us. I think Disney being one of the most beloved entertainment companies in the world, and a huge presence in the media space. Um, what has not changed for us is just our independence, right? I think in the way that we operate, and Disney recognizes in a great. Obviously, it's been fantastic. So I think all positives for us, right? From our perspective, our mission is remains the same, which is to essentially provide amazing entertainment options. Been fortunate that the Disney Plus launch has been brilliant. Bringing Disney Plus to all of India, it has been, in these times, has been a real privilege for us.
Right. And I'm sure you have a bunch of interesting stories to tell us about your scale. one of the most popular questions we've gotten today is about how you manage the kind of scale you do, how that has evolved over a period of time,
Correct.
especially for live events like your cricketing events. Like, how does
Correct.
that differ from like the rest of your like deferred uh,
Sure.
videos? You want to take us through that a little?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I like to refer to as a chalk and cheese, right? People say that, hey, you compete with Netflix and Amazon Prime. I say, in reality, if you look at Hotstar, we actually compete with television, right? We've got news, we've got entertainment, TV, whatnot, right? Uh, so doing VOD, which is what people like Netflix, Amazon Prime, everybody does, very different from doing live, right? When you produce live sports, this is essentially coming to you don't have any, there is no time to react. There could be, imagine, as you produce any live content, even what we are doing right now, right? If I say something, or there is a glitch, something that I'm not okay with, there's no coming back from that. It's done, right? So it's about the same sort of philosophy, the same kind of rigor, right? I've written about it in about two blogs really that are on our blog. And the only thing I'd say, like, I'll tee it off with some more juice, but essentially, planning for failure is the most basic tenet, right? So I think a lot of times, and this comes from, back at Open Table, one of my early mentors and my CTO used to be this guy called Charlie, and he had a very senior guy. He had his roots in real time computing. So he used to rap us on the knuckles, right? One thing he said all the time, and we used to joke that it should be on a T-shirt. It should be on a T-shirt. Was that don't do anything in real time that you don't need to do in real time. And pretty much, there's nothing that you need to do in real time if you think about it, right? Like I chuckle every time I hear anybody tell me that I want this right now. So I say, you're not getting it, right? So that is one heavy tenet. And so Charlie used to dock our bonuses if our CPUs ran more than 10% for that quarter. This is a true story, right? I think so. The senior group uh, missed their bonuses 6 quarters in a row. True story. You were like, so finally you were like giving up. You were like, Charlie, this is just a ploy to not pay us after all the hard work we are doing. But I think, while he was very harsh in what he did, I think it really instilled a lot of that ethic in us, right? I think a lot of that ethic really carried forward at Hotstar when we started to design these systems, right? And, if I go back to my to the first IPO that kind of laid the foundation of the entire product, right? Largely, we spend a lot of time in the lab. We spend a lot of money testing. We had the luxury to do that, I'll say. I'll call it a luxury because it's expensive to do it. But the philosophy was very much of somebody running a marathon, right? You don't run a marathon till you need to run a marathon, right? I'm sure a lot of you, perhaps a lot of you have run marathons. I haven't, but I'm familiar with the theory behind it. Uh, the idea is very much typically, at least my friends who train for marathons tell me that, you want to, keep building up, your endurance, and you save the full marathon for the full marathon. So that was kind of the same thing that we did, right? Like we essentially obsessively figured out our entire workflow. We did a lot of testing from a persona perspective. We decided what is the traffic mix that we've seen in the past, then look at it very pessimistically, figure out what are the type of journeys that may happen on the platform, and simulate, once you had the base simulation going, amplify it, right? And pull in traffic of 5 million, 10 million. So imagine you had 10 million people on your platform at the same time, right? There is a series of hoops they need to jump to get to video is just the last piece, the final thing that happens, right? And that is like unicast, largely done by CDN. But prior to that, right, essentially they have to go through multiple doors of authentication, then checking the entitlement, right? Figuring out, there are multiple apps that they're holding, they're running multiple levels, people are buying subscriptions at the same time, right? There are, believe it or not, whenever there's, if even if we had 25 odd million people watching cricket, we may have about 2 or 3 million people watching entertainment, right? So there are, not everybody is doing that, so people are doing different things on your platform. Everything just aggregates and hits your platform. So then simulating, saying that, let imagine you're 10 million people, they were all doing different things at different times, and then bang your, beat up on your system, right? Inject some chaos, do some chaos testing, turn things off, you know uh, uh, put in load unexpectedly, right? We do these things called game days. The first couple of game days are usually flaming disasters, right? Like you kill the patient sort of outcomes, and then towards the end we sort of, we try and surprise our engineers by not telling them what the traffic patterns are. So it's pretty fun. I think we've gotten fairly good at that. And the one thing that really was material was, the video must play. There is, under no circumstance should the video stop playing, right? And we worked really hard to kind of figure out, again, these are failure journeys, as I like to call them. Obsessively map out every journey, figure out between, build in circuit breakers, if you will, lots of monitoring. One of the first things we realized in 2018 was that all, when I joined Overtable, joined Hotstar, we said, okay, let's put in some sort of a metrics system, right? A lot of people use APMs and things, so we said, okay, we need some telemetry, let's do it. Then we, while everything was hunky dory till we got into game days, we were like, wait, this is like 5 minutes behind. We'd be toast if we did this, right? We can't, the delay is way too much for us to really rely on it. And then again, getting into, let's say we are on the public cloud, so getting into CloudWatch and sort of figuring out, that is also not tenable, right? So pretty mad over there. Largely, from a metrics perspective, so, and building out, we ended up building this aggregate dashboard, which essentially looks at all the services in one go. This was and for every service, it's color coded, right? It tells me at simultaneously, right, whether it's red, amber, or green, right? We look at 200 rate, 400 rate, 5xx rate. We also look at average latencies. What are the P99 latencies looking like? Right, and then basis that, essentially that forms our command center, right? I am also a Formula One fan, so I have this. Back in 2018, I constituted this game marshal concept. So essentially, every game has a game marshal, right? The game marshal is the CEO of that game. Nothing happens, right? And this was essential when it came from an operational perspective, right? Like, it was not only just technical, but from an operational perspective, having one person responsible for taking calls when there is a crisis is invaluable, right? And I initially was the game marshal for a whole bunch of the key games. The top line is that, there are, the whole, everybody, including our vendors, everybody got into a Slack room during the match. We had, on-call rotations and things. So there's a whole theory of, just operations that go into managing an event like this, right? And as issues are coming, people raise their hands, and of course we've got pages and everything going off, and then the game marshal is on the hook to have the entire picture and take the calls, right? So we have this big dashboard, and now, earlier we used to have people looking at it. Our goal has been to automate a lot of that. And the gold standard is, can we run an IPL game from home, right? That would have come to pass perhaps in COVID, if that had happened with empty stadiums. But we are at that point, and it's fantastic. So um, that was 2018. I'll quickly jump into, like, from an evolution perspective. 2018 had all these things, with compute, and we had laid the foundation of a lot of stuff initially. I wrote extensively about how auto scaling just didn't work for us. I saw a question, I think somebody was talking about a public cloud. We realized that things had limits. These are like fun Hotstar conversations, right? Like, people come to you saying, wait, dude, you're using like 90% of the internet. You're like, what? That's kind of surreal, right? Public clouds coming telling you that it's not as elastic as you thought, right? So we quickly, that was the other thing that we figured, that these things are not infinite, right? And per unit efficiency becomes very critical, right? So we spent a lot of time on that, right? And year two was all about running frugally. We used 10x lesser compute than we did in 2018, and ran almost 2x the load, more than 2x the load on concurrency in 2019. So it's pretty good.
Akash, you want to maybe paint a bit of a picture of what the stack and infra looks like at Hotstar, to the extent that it's not confidential?
Sure. The stack is fairly, I can talk about that. We are primarily a Java shop, Spring Boot. Though lately we've started to move a lot of our core services to Go. Uh, just finding out that Java is not able to keep up with some of the concurrency requirements that we may have. The cloud is all we are all completely on public cloud on AWS, and slew of databases, right? Got Dynamo, MySQL, all the usual suspects. Recently, we onboarded Scilla for certain use cases. Elastic, data warehouses, all S3, Hadoop, Hive, that sort of stuff. From a language perspective, also, I think like primarily a lot of our initial services and a lot of our core services should remain in Java. But again, Go has gotten super prominence. People really like Go. We've got parts of our system which are in live ops and so that people are onboarded onto Python over there and they like to use that. So while we are not super polyglot, we I think there are some things that we are, wherever it makes sense, we've tried to widen up a little bit.
And when you're building a new system or architecting something out, what does decision making for you guys look like?
Um, there was a build versus buy question. I can use that as a
Sure.
starting point. Sorry.
Sure, go ahead.
Oh, okay. All right. So typically, as we are all engineers, we love to we say, hey, let's just build it, right? A lot of my journey at Hotstar has been a lot about why should we build it, right? And really controlling what is core, right? I'm a big fan of cheating, so I figure how can I get to market faster, right? And if that means that I have to use a particular vendor, then so be it, right? We'll vet it and we'll figure out the cost of doing that. But at some level, in the back of the mind, we say, hey, this is from an example. Let me try to share certain examples, right? And perhaps that will contextualize. So I won't use names, but back when we started, we were for our data warehouse, right? We said, we want to, we have these apps, there's all these clickstream events, right? Billions of clickstream events coming in daily, and we want to focus on cleaning up and building our warehouse, and then we also want to build all the pipes. So we want to own all the pieces. So we figured, well, what is the most important thing right now, right? We don't have anything right now. So okay, we want to focus on building a warehouse that once it consumes the events, able to create a more democratized platform. So we spent a lot of time building that and use something off the shelf, as our pipes, as it were. We could, in about 8 months or so, we realized that this is also a pretty core piece of our architecture. We learned quite a bit about what we really wanted. I think a lot of times the architecting everything up front may leave room in the design to truly know what you want, right? I think knowing something that you need 10 months later, and we had a recent example where we had built out an architecture at the beginning of say 2019, and by the time we ended 2019, right, we quickly realized that we ended up cloning that architecture a bunch of times and then spotting a lot of commonality in the use cases and then sort of re-architecting that. So top line is, I think, for us, uh, first figuring out, am I truly, how am I serving my customer is number one, right? Number two, am I building it frugally, right? We take great pride and great pains we run Hotstar like a startup, right? And the philosophy is that my credit card is on that AWS account, right? You very different thinking when you are paying out of your own pocket for the AWS resources you use, or any public cloud, right? I don't want to bring slam AWS unnecessarily. It's really a function of how you build software, how the team builds software. So a key component of our design reviews is also now total cost of ownership. So when you come to the table, you would have evaluated, say, multiple data stores, maybe perhaps different design patterns that you come to the table with, right? And you'd also say, hey, what is the cost of building and running all of this, right? And how do you see it exploring? We've gotten it down to a science where, we have team budgets. We hand out bills to people saying, hey, this is the money you're spending, right? And even down to actually saying, hey, how much did your query cost on your warehouse, right? Data is usually one of the top spenders, right? And what we found when we undertook this journey is just that, it's very easy for people to say, of course I need that data, of course I need to run that thing every 15 minutes, right? Well, you dig a little deeper and you realize there's absolutely no need to do any of those things, right? So again, I'm very broad brushing, but it is just it is just something that we practice at Hotstar, which is, that it's our money at the end of the day. How can we keep more money into the organization, right? So it's a multifaceted thing. Start with saying, do we really need to build it? Is this core to the business, right? Is this something that if I own, I am going to be able to deliver more value to my customer? It could be anything, right? Ad stack, social, streaming, what have you. And going from there, essentially saying that, yeah, I could spend maybe $1 million to build and operate it, but you know, is that valuable? Am I going to earn $1 million or more out of building it this way? So it's a slightly more deeper conversation, but we it is just a way of using a Mandalorian Ryan. This is the way. That's how we
And
do it at Hotstar.
when you have to do trade-offs like this, right, or any kind of trade-off, there's this saying, right, good, fast, or cheap, choose any two. Like, how does your approach to doing trade-offs, especially when you have a business versus tech kind of a conversation or an issue? How
Oh,
do you deal with all of those?
that's a good one. So we take on a lot of debt on a regular basis, as I'm sure a lot of super open about it as well. We try our best to minimize that, right? And I think you're using a euphemism when you say trade-off. It's really debt. uh, so the bar for me is always that, am I doing something that's throwaway, or are we doing something that's moving me forward, right? So I have a to be state, and I could say, what, shoot, it will take me 6 months to reach and build this fantastic spaceship, right? So okay, great, uh, right? But in that 6 months time, what is the revenue you're leaving on the table? What use cases are you leaving unanswered? uh, is there a way to get there faster? And typically you can go two ways. One is, you say, I'm going to take a lot of debt and just put what is out there. Sometimes we've done some of that when we had a very small team and we had to really, I think we did IPL 2018 like almost only 30 people, right? This comprises the sum total of the entire team, right? Whether it's quality, front end, back end, whatever. So we did actually bury a lot of bodies back then, but we've always sort of committed to us to pay it back, right? We've done a lot of that. We're not afraid to rip things out and redo it again. We've done a lot of that. I would say in the last about maybe 16 months or so now, that we have a team size that we can manage a lot of. We can sort of do that. It's always about, the philosophy is about doing the right thing, which is to say that you know where you want to go. If you are, if you're able to incrementally build your way over there, moving forward versus moving laterally, I think that's the principle. And that's the way we've been able to, even if we take debt, then we know that at least we are moving forward. We're not piling on too much debt. So that has been one of the techniques that I've really used, saying I'd much rather do some engineering or take a little more time, if it's if we can do it, to move forward and not just throw things out there that are just pure debt.
And like, what does your hiring philosophy look like? Like, what do you look for when you're building out a team? And how do you sort of percolate the values that you have or the existing team has, the things that you care about, get that
Sure.
down to the new people who join and set a culture?
Absolutely. um, when I'm, so all of my uh, philosophy in general has been, and I think every CTO may resonate with this sort of viewpoint, perhaps, right? Like, at least my philosophy is like, largely this entire team has been, I am the seed, right? I'll take a team, I'll incubate it, right? I'll personally drive it. At least I used to when we were smaller, right? I'd still do it in some capacity for certain forward-looking teams, and then I find a leader and spin it off, right? This works when you are maybe under 50 people, perhaps, right? And till we got to about 100, I used to actually interview every person we hired. I was the last call. So big Ben Horowitz fan. I think he talks about it in his book as well. There is, you can't outsource or delegate culture. If it's important to you, you got to make time for it. right? And I think he uses a great example where I think he similar sort of thing, where he says he finds that his culture is sort of deviating, and he says, why is this happening? And he realizes that his whatever he is important to him, he's sort of asked other people to deliver that message, and it's gotten morphed along the way, right? Not negatively so, but it's not exactly what he wants, right? Which is, as a leader, that's you want to run your team a particular way, right? And he decides, and he says, I gave myself all sorts of reasons, and I did the same. It's like, oh, I'm busy, and I was, right? Like, but how do you make time for it? I think those become that is important. So till about we have 100 people. I was the last call that everybody had. Uh, then it's gotten really insane, and since then, now what I've done is sort of I take every new engineer meets with me in an induction. So I drive that, right? It's a good almost 3.5 hour session, where they get to know me, they get to know what's important to me, right, and create a connection, right? A lot of the original 100 people I hired, they have a special bond, and when the team is small, people can come to me, right, largely. But in India, as the team grows, there is a bit of like leadership. We put our leaders on pedestals, right? We've been taught since we were kids that don't ask questions. uh, you know Someone senior says it must be the right thing. So it's sad, like, and it's good to see a lot of younger people now kind of challenge that status quo. For me, I really learned that when I moved to the States, and I was like, oh, I can do that. That's cool and very liberating, right? And I really encourage. I think that's one of the things that we really brought back from the Valley, and I encourage that. But to my point of, when the team was small, people know me, and those people don't hesitate to talk to me directly, right? I'm just a peer to them. Um, but for a lot of new people that we bring on, sometimes that barrier exists, and bridging the barrier and sort of presenting yourself as a resource, giving them the courage, as it were, to just write you, slack you, and say, hey, uh, I feel this way, or I have this issue, right? Because sometimes people think, oh, it's an escalation. So now if I join meetings, it's an escalation, which is a very negative word to use, right? I'm just an interested party, right? If I'm not making a decision, I'm just a peer. I think really that's kind of the culture.
And this is an interesting perspective the uh, from looking at a large team like yours at this point. I just want to segue into one of the questions that's been asked on the chat. You want to talk about, like, let's say when you're building a technical team out from scratch as a startup, like what should somebody be looking at, right? I think the folks who have asked this question, they're from, this is Sanchit Gupta. Like, I mean, for people who do not have like a lot of background in hiring or whatever, right? Like, how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, this is a tough one, man. I think yeah, we wish the harsh truth is, we wish that there could be a tech co-founder always. Right, I've worked with some startups that don't have tech co-founders, and it's really hard. Right, hiring is hard. Plus, you're not sure who you're bringing on. Right, I think really need to hire that patient zero, right, or ally with a partner. Whether it is a mentor, or if you are funded, then you should look to your fund to kind of like tag you with a CTO of one of their portfolios to help you hire that first person. Right, I would hire someone who is very strong technically, and have someone else vet them for you, right, and then bring them on board. So if you don't have technical co-founders, you're going to have to sort of bring this talent from elsewhere, and help you sort of jump in, and once you have that initial person, then people will follow, people that she has worked with, people that she can pitch to more effectively, because that language is spoken in a particular way. So then it's always very hard to get that first one. Again, this is also easier said than done. It's For a small company, attracting talent is very, very difficult. So try to get that technical co-founder, go to meetups, back, do it the good old way. uh, yeah.
Right. And with this entire lockdown situation, like, how have you guys been managing the team, sort of keeping morale up, coordinating? Like, how has that been working for you?
It's We are in 4 locations already, Aditya. So, I have a team in Beijing, Gurgaon, Mumbai, and Bangalore, and we're very used to working remotely. It's just the way, right? Like one of the things I do when I do hire people, I tell them two things. One is, that I expect you to be at work. We have core hours, 11 to 6, and work from home only when there are extenuating circumstances, right? Try to work together. But that being said, we've just it's been an organic extension. It's been hard, to I think kind of just finding the lines between when work ends. Like earlier, I used to go to the office and come back, and there was a commute time, so there was these logical compartments. Now with working from home, that has become very hard, right? And I um, back back when I was with Open Table, I almost I worked from home for 4 years. So it's but even this feels very different, right? I thought I'd just sort of slide into that routine, but it's pretty hard, and even for me now. And from a morale perspective, I think from a coordination perspective, we're very used to working remotely. So largely, my teams have not felt uh, a big pain or a big shift in operating. Though to a letter, everybody feels that it's far more intense. Ironically, right? Like just working remotely, you're constantly in meetings, you're constantly on. It's hard to draw the balance. Um, I know like a lot of my teammates, they'll gather together, they do a chai pe charcha, or they may do a beer Friday or something. It's all over Zoom, at least for those people who have any beer left anymore. So there are things like that. I think I wouldn't say that we've taken any novel steps, but I think people have found ways to sort of you know talk to each other or just be with each other somehow. So yeah.
I'll segue into one of the other questions that we've been asked. Like, how do you look at growth as an engineer, and how do you communicate that across the team? People will often fall for bright and shiny tools and libraries, and like say that if they're not using that, they're not learning, right? So, how do you deal with that?
Good question. Um, it's a lot of coaching. I think it depends really. If I step back, and largely if you have really good mentors on the team and you're able to uh, create a more democratic process where people can participate in design discussions and share their ideas and thoughts, right? That's okay. You want to bring a new library or you want to use a new technology, that's perfectly fine, right? Bring it to the table and we'll evaluate it, right? But I think if I step back a little bit, largely for me, I always try and tell my engineers or my engineering leaders always tell the teams that are working for them that growth comes from multiple facets, right? It is not just when you're a more junior engineer, you may be more keen on accumulating these points that I worked on all these frameworks, and I can do all these. I understand, a lot of you. There is a time to create a breadth, but if you don't have a depth as a junior engineer, you're not going to go further, right? So you try to focus a lot on fundamentals, right? Like you get into your conversations and you say, well, let's talk a little bit about databases, and if you just talk to me about orms and you're not able to talk to me about fundamentals, or we'll talk about hashing or something, or caching. Even caching is great, right? Say, well, I'm just going to put a redis in there. Well, okay, well, how does that work, right? Do the basics and fundamentals of it? And not everyone may have a computer science background. Even computer science students may not immediately carry forward the education into the practical world, right? It took me a long time, but we try and sort of bring these points out. Having said that, I have had cases where engineers will quit because they feel that we're not allowing them to work with the shiny toys. So I think there is no one size fits all. If you ask me, I really would invest in, if you're working with smart people, be a sponge and really double down on fundamentals. See, tools are or platforms and stacks, these are all manifestations of, if you go think about it deeply, they're basic fundamentals, right? If you understand that, you can adapt very well. Building adaptability is very important, right? Because in the long run, adaptability and the ability to sort of take known solution sets and apply them to unknown problems and unknown domains, that becomes incredibly powerful, right? People will pay you a lot of money for it. So you may chase a few lakhs here and there because someone is doing something cool, right? But I know I have examples where I know, like one of my engineers in Tiny, I remember he quit, and I said, hey, why are you quitting? He's like, I am very passionate about Go, and I want to learn. I want to program professionally in Go, and this was maybe about 5 years back. So I said, well, I'm never going to be able to give you that opportunity, so you should go find a new job, right? So I think leaders also need to make space. If hear younger engineers out, and be open minded about where the company is going, and see if that is the right thing to move the organization forward, then you should invest in that.
And in keeping with the core audience of this conversation, which is primarily technical leadership, CTO, VP of engineering type, like what are your thoughts on looking for hiring and measuring senior engineering leadership, right?
Rapport number one. I think if you're for me as a CTO, when I do an explore call, I need to connect with this person, right? It's actually super harsh, right? You get 40 minutes perhaps. Right? Typically, I don't spend more than 45 minutes talking to a candidate, but you get 45 minutes to make a judgment, right? We're just talking to our interviewers over the last week, and we were actually discussing that it's a lot about sort of fighting your biases, right? Like you personally have certain bars and certain biases, and which people are going to be successful in your org eventually. Ultimately they need to get along with you. So would you like to work with this person is the key question that you need to answer, right? And then from there, of course, there are the obvious things that you would judge for. Absolutely, capability is a must, right? So technical chops. But largely, again, when I speak to people, I love to hear their journey. I love to hear, have they done things that are off their resume, right? Or have they followed a linear path in their career? So I like to work with people who are curious. I like to work with people who are hustlers a little bit, right? So you know don't tell me that your company didn't give you an opportunity to learn something, right? Like, then you're just in a linear path perhaps. And culture fit is huge, right? Being able to talk to somebody is huge. But again, you also should keep the ability to again fight that bias and say, yeah, well, I can talk to this person. Is this person being someone that's not going to fit in my culture at all? My people are not going to like this person, or is this a quiet personality? Every now and then you meet someone who's very smart, but perhaps they are introverted and they need to come out of that shell a little bit. So we have about 40 minutes to break those barriers and make a judgment. It's a tough one. Um,
Uh, Jumping back into the audience questions, I see there are like multiple questions asking about trade-offs, and I know we've touched upon trade-offs a bit earlier in our conversations, but maybe we can deep dive a bit more. Like, how do you trade off speed versus quality as a startup? I think this person is looking at like reflecting on a smaller organization, like in a saturated industry like yours. How do you maintain speed of pushing to production versus design, engineering, and security?
got it. I don't understand the saturated industry, but I think it's not very different from any startup for us, right? I think while we'd say that, hey, we are a startup, right? Like, if you step back, right, like startups are trying to achieve product market fits, right? And they're moving at a certain pace sometimes, which is the move fast, break things, Zuckerberg philosophy. Versus, while we want to move at startup pace, we don't have the opportunity to break anything, right? So we have a pretty massive footprint, and we cannot be down. So we do not compromise on design at all, right? I think that is, we just spend a lot of time architecting what we are trying to put out. um, Security is again something that as a startup you sacrifice willy nilly. It's been it is, as you grow larger, and we as a Hotstar or Disney in general, there's always a target painted on your back, right? So we've actually had to double down and invest a lot in building that capability. It's not obvious. A lot of CTOs out there, I played that the CISO role for a while, right? Your big training is Mr. Robot, I suppose. But the funda is that eventually, when you actually work with a professional, right, and this is true of any field, you're like, wow, you were like way out of your depth. And the kind of threats, we like to spend a lot of time on behavioral security, I would call it, versus just uh, you know brute security, which is largely what you get via PTs, parameters. It's all the good stuff. But when you realize that, you know, there are this is like probably maybe 20-30%. Right? It's hygiene. It's important, but can't be your strategy overall. Design is very important for us. Like I said, we cannot fail. So resiliency, design, building a scalable product, right? Like we don't have, we don't even have the luxury of trying to put out something that is suboptimal, right? We just get butchered out there as soon as the first wave of customers came out. So it's
There's a,
not an option for me at all, honestly.
there's a question from what appears to be an old colleague of yours, Hiren, asks, says that you were a big fan of Scrum when we worked together at the Open Table. Do you still believe in the agile ways of working? And are you
Yeah,
practicing Scrum at Hotstar, especially now with people working from home with this whole COVID-19 situation?
absolutely. Hey, Hiren. Hi. I hope you're well. Hiren was one of our agile coaches back in Open Table. So big shout out there. But yeah, no, I'm a big agile fan. I think so. I was at Open Table initially when I had my first agile training. It's a little cliched, but it's sort of a light bulb, right? I think at that time I like a lot of people say it's all humbug, right? Like it's the example, the parallel that I always like to give people is that you can if whether you're writing in Go or Java or something, right? You can choose not to follow the syntax and you will have interesting results, right? You can choose not to follow design patterns, right? And you say, hey, I'm mostly doing it the way I think is correct. You will achieve results, right? But you want to spend a lot of time fighting the plumbing. I think process is kind of the same way, right? Not to say that one is better than the other. It's very dependent on the team. The short answer, yes, big agile fan. Do we follow Scrum at at Hotstar? Yes, we do. But Scrum takes a lot of discipline. So I will not say that we're doing it well. I think one thing I remember from my early agile days, which I always remind people, is most Scrums are really mini waterfalls. Really. So yeah, we battle with the same problems. Um, I I can't force 250 people. I can, but it gets super intense. So while we coach our engineering team to follow a lot of the principles, and they do, right, using Jira is not being agile, by the way. So it's Jira is just a tool to manifest it, but eventually it takes a lot of discipline to follow that. So we do definitely do that, and we follow all the regular rituals and things. Where I find teams really falter, and I know we also struggle with this, depends on team to team, is again giving the right time to planning and estimation, right? In execution you may follow Scrum, but if you skip the steps because I was busy, right? Or I just need to deliver product faster. Just pay for it in different ways, right? That's constantly what I keep sharing with my groups as well when we do these reviews, right? And one of my big philosophies is about do finish more things, less things in progress. Now, this is a very I tell my team also, it's not something that I've originally come up with, right? But it's a very pithy thing, and it's super profound if you actually think about it, right? Like practically, I just tell my team that just because you have 5 engineers on your team, it doesn't mean you should start 5 stories. Start only 3 stories or 2 stories, right? Get more people on. This hurts people. This hurts people's heads. They say, "Arey, come on, yaar, no, 2 people can't work on this, right?" Then I tell them, well, you don't trust source control. So we have interesting conversations, but really it's about it's not pair programming also, but it's also sort of trying to finish things faster and then pulling off the next thing off the backlog. A lot of teams, I feel, start many things in parallel and then have lots of incomplete things, and then they are constantly just catching up, right, till the point where the backlog is a joke, and you are like, this is complete BS. Agile sucks. Yeah, sure, you could say that, but it takes a lot of discipline.
Yeah, I have seen those backlogs. Um, we've almost come up to the head of the hour, so I'll pick up just one last question. This might be a bit contentious, but is also very popular. How do you measure engineering productivity? People often say it is directly related to value produced, but value produced is directly related to opportunities that exist and that have been provided. And many projects fail as well. So, how do you evaluate someone then?
How do you evaluate someone or engineering teams? That the question is a little more broader.
Right. So
Um,
yeah, I think it's like on a evaluation basis for individuals. Then
sure. So I think it's like
but we can touch
uh,
on both.
sure, sure. Just thinking, formulating an answer, right? Like largely, if you think about performance management, right? Performance management. Let's take three scales. You got meets expectations, exceeds, and then you are over, exceeding, even above exceeds expectation, whatever you want to call it, right? Largely, if you see, you are as a foot soldier, if you want to call it, right? Like, or anyone in the engineering team, you're simply executing things that your product team is telling you to do, right? You do some engineering hygiene things, you do things that your product team tells you, and you do them to the best of your ability, right? Whether you're taking on debt and so on. So generalizing many things, right? So a lot of times, the thing to look for from an evaluation perspective, at least in my perspective, is that, did you do everything I told you? Yes. Then you're just meeting expectations, right? A lot of times people say, well, I'm working 16-hour days. You're like, yeah, but you did exactly what I told you. And it's very it's very sometimes it becomes contentious, and it's sometimes dissatisfying, because you're like, wait, I just work like crazy for you. But are you working intelligently? Are you taking the problem statements given to you and optimizing them, right? Like, are you using your mind? That's when you jump to the next level, which is you're exceeding my expectations, because I hired you, you're inherently a smart person, right? You say, hey, wait, meets expectation is not a bad rating, but it is what it is, right? You are a competent person to be in this organization, and you do your job really well, but you do what you're told, right? And if you begin to rise from there, then really it's about saying, I don't need to tell you so many things. I'm giving you loose statements when you're rising. This also sometimes can be confused, or it may bleed into your maturity as, hey, I'm an SDE versus an SG2 or a senior engineer, right? Because as you go deeper into your career and you start morphing, right, you can operate with lower guidance, you can operate with more ambiguity, right? But again, at the same time, if you need a lot of hand holding to take you through that, or if you're only executing, right, only being a good executioner is a meets expectation for me, right? And then going beyond that is about, how are you able to find the opportunities to do that smarter, right? Like, it's almost like it's computational complexity sometimes, right? You can do a brute force algorithm, but can you do it in a more efficient compute time? So thinking about that, or originating these thoughts to say, can I do my work more smarter, right? Sometimes you may find an exceeds expectation, like, I'm going home and I want to leave home, I'm doing a 9 to 5 job. Well, if you're doing super efficient during the day somehow, right, like, you're able to sort of find the smart things to do, and that will separate you at some level, right? And then beyond that is always your rock stars, right? Because this basically people who you don't even have to ask them, right? Or you don't have to give them something. They will look for problems, right? So they're not only are they doing their things, they're also looking to solve problems. But again, this is the caveat here, is that at least whatever you're doing, you should do it solidly, become a really strong professional on your core job, and then start to build upon this capability that I do what I do really well. What are the things that I can do beyond being told, or how can I add value to just the basic daily things that I'm doing, right? Very naive example could be simply somebody, it's the same. I'll give the same algorithm example, right? It's the same. It's probably equivalent to saying that uh, you know I need to count a bunch of things, right? I could enumerate a bunch of those things, or somebody can come in and simply write a script that does all of that, right? And I've seen both varieties, where someone will work hard for 12 hours and give you the same result, and then someone walks in and does the same thing in 1 hour. And 1 hour person is definitely more valuable.
Right. I think we are. I think that's your daughter there.
Yeah, it's my daughter.
We are close to our time, so I'm gonna wrap this up. Thank you, Akash, so much for giving us your time, and like, I'm sure you have a terribly busy schedule. So thank you so much for doing this. It has been really fascinating to learn a bit more about like the internals of a service that so many of us love and use.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for having me.
Bharat, you
Great.
wanna anything to
Yes,
add?
thanks, Akash. Thanks, Aditya. I think that was a great session, quite engaging and a lot of questions. So what we could also do in terms of questions is we could take it offline and possibly, some interesting ones. You could just tweet it out or write in some of your social media, channels, Akash. In the interest of time, if there are some interesting questions. And yes, thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for participating and keep, checking our social media pages, Bloom Ventures. You'll keep seeing a lot of updates on the next set of sessions that we are gonna do and possibly join. And have a great weekend, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Thanks
guys.
everyone,
Bye.
and that's a wrap.
Thanks, Aditya. Thanks, Bharat.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good day.